Today we will be doing a deep dive on A/B testing, some functionality that is within Marketing Cloud. And so generally, I'm sure many of us know this, maybe recall it from some science courses back in the day. What is an A/B test? And what you're really trying to do is compare a single variable to test which one performs better. And in this case, of course, we're talking about our email sends and how our constituents are engaging with those messages. And more specifically, when I say that engagement, how we're really calculating that, those metrics are from open rates as well as click rates. So really great indicators of what people are doing and measurable. So mentioning those two different ways of measuring metrics, we'll focus first on increasing open rates. And so there's a couple of different A/B tests that you can perform that are definitely going to impact that open rate, or I should say if done correctly. And so those three A/B tests include a from name A/B test, a send time, as well as either subject line or pre-headers. And so all of those characteristics are really things that are going to impact whether or not someone opens your message. It's kind of that first impression. So when we talk about increasing those open rates and what options you have in testing different from names, a couple examples here. And the first across the top is that more generic e-com. I think we see this a lot, a department or a unit name. But we can definitely test on the right there is, do people engage more, maybe open more when it's coming from the person, being Melanie Jones and seeing my title there as Ecom Training Manager. And that's when we actually have tested in-house and have determined that there's certain communications that make sense to be more broadly from ecom, and those more transactional ones that you have to do work on, or we're having that one-on-one interaction, much more come from myself. So that's something we discovered with our users. Another example, more broader one from CU Boulder Chancellor's Office is similar there. One consideration that I do need y'all to be mindful of course, don't run away and think, oh, we're gonna do a from name A/B test on every single email we ever send out. There are other implications to doing a from name A/B test, and part of that goes back to constituents, maybe adding you as a contact in their inbox or in their address book. And so changing that might change if they've added you as a friend or not. So something to think about and a reason to not always change it. Determine what works for you, what trends kind of work for you, and then move forward from there. The other A/B test that I mentioned is that send time A/B test. And they can have big impact and very little effort. And so really, just simply sending at two different points in time in the day. The example I have up here, it does go more and more granular. And so I have put that as, okay, test one should kind of be a bit more broad. And then as you finesse that and figure out what's working, you can get more and more granular. And so sometimes for that first test, I would advise somebody send, say at 10 in the morning compared to 2 p.m. And that comes from a best practice I heard at a conference that, right, people act on emails when they're able to engage with them, when they're sitting at their desk. So that could be a good tactic to try. One thing that you do need to consider is some of those very large email sends. We ask you not to send during business hours. I'll talk a little bit more on that. So while you wouldn't be able to send from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m., you could still kind of do something similar and do 8 a.m. versus 5 p.m. So figuring out what time of day are people engaging more. And then once you've kind of figured that out, again, stick with that time, but move towards a different day. Start testing Monday compared to Tuesday. Pick a Wednesday, see what works. And then, of course, even test 3, I get more granular. Maybe these 15-minute increments start mattering, but that's not where I would start the test. That would come later on. So I did mention that very important consideration when looking at audience size. And so again, if you're sending very large communications or to populations over 20,000, and specifically internal audiences, there is a chance that they could crash servers and us not doing regular business. So if there are those internal audiences with @UCCS or @CU, @Colorado email addresses, that's something to be mindful of. I'm sure you all can put this one together, and maybe where your bosses might not be too excited about you doing A/B testing if the message might be urgent. No, we've had, right, the message is urgent and there could be damage in certain constituents receiving it hours before others. So of course, think about that as far as your content. And then testing frequency as well. There's going to be a point in time when you can only test so many elements as far as that send time. And then ultimately, some consistency could be helpful. Looking at different subject line tests, and these are just 4 that I put out there. There are so many different opportunities with that subject line. And really, your voice as a whole, what tone are you taking? But my first one, thinking of them as being much more action driven. So a demo of space will be hosted on Tuesday, totally accurate, factual, but maybe attend Tuesday's webinar. What are you asking this person to do? You don't need to hide that or be subtle about it. Be clear as day. Another great option, I think, is trying to be as relevant to the audience as possible. And a lot of people, or I find myself doing this sometimes, I'll start writing, I am reaching out to you because of this reason. And it doesn't need to be that direct. You can think about their experiences and come up with a relatable topic. And so in this example, students returning to campus during COVID-19 probably would get some good opens. It's an interesting topic. But my take was to go a little bit of a different direction, assuming this would be an alumni communication. Do you remember returning to campus after summer break? And it's a bit different now. So some of these things you might think are going to work. You don't know until you test it. And that's perfectly fine. I continually say a failed test, one that you thought would not go or that you predicted and it did not go that way, not a failure at all. I view that as a success. What not to do down the road. Example 3 here, which I absolutely take almost with most of my approaches, is a more comedic one. And this is one that we actually did it would have been last fall, if you were with us then. So we were rolling out some templates with CU branding in them, and we did an A/B test, one with, hey, don't forget to follow CU branding in your events and emails. Again, that's fine, but we saw, I think it was a 20% open rate increase for the leaves might be changing colors, but CU isn't. Please keep with our brand. So that one always seems to go well for myself. And similarly to some of the other ones, more timely or urgent. So of course you can say reminder, register for Tuesday's ecom webinar, but that sense of registration closes tomorrow might pique someone's interest a bit better. Oh, and as a whole, I do kind of lump subject line and pre-header A/B tests together because they are so similar. So one of the things I've also seen folks do is, okay, great, we're going to do this A/B testing, and that's a great shift culturally. But then to not make that test something worthwhile is just a bit of a loss. So maybe a message from CU versus a note from CU. Is that really going to give me enough directive to make a good change in the future? Does that help me understand the tone that my folks like? Maybe, maybe not. So just something to think about. Of course, again, going back to that testing frequency, this is an area that I would say test as long as you can. You can always be testing new creative subject lines. I was at a conference, I don't recall what session it was, but somebody was adamant about if you are not doing an A/B test on an email, you're missing an opportunity. I haven't quite adopted that model myself, but it's an ambitious one. All right. We will go ahead and pivot on to looking at increasing that other element of engagement, which resonate even better is that click-through rate. Where did people actually take action? And so the elements or the A/B tests that we talked about earlier can absolutely drive increased open rate as well as increased click rate. But for now, we're going to focus on these other elements that are directly correlated to those increased click rates, right? So I won't drill into send times again, but content areas, as well as the entire email. So pretty straightforward when you're thinking about those different content areas. And a great thing that you can test are different call to actions or buttons. So in this example, and really focusing on that single variable, that we do have that gold button versus a black button. Let's see if folks engage with one better. Again, when it comes to testing frequency on this element, possibilities are even more endless than what I said about subject lines and pre-headers. The level of creativity that I have seen out of certain industries has been absurd. And I've mentioned this example before, so apologies if you've heard it before. But I mentioned an example of different colored buttons. And there are people who test every single email and will get as granular as the shade of the color of the button or the roundness of the button. And people will tell you there is a perfect roundness to the button, but it all depends on their communications, their constituents, and all the testing that they've done. One thing, kind of a one-pager that we have put together, and I'll show you where you can find this on our e-com website. It's really just an attempt to aggregate all that information that I just went through. And so the idea here is, and you can see these little arrows down the side and across the top, that as you move to your right, you can generally assume it's going to take a higher level of time commitment and effort on yours and your team's part to prepare for that. And then we also have going down the order at which I would kind of advise you test those things a little loosely, but for the most part. So we talked about from name and that a person and a name with their department versus just the department name. The idea is start checking off which of these experiments you've done, which maybe some of these you're not going to see any results at all. It didn't have an impact, but then there's other ones that you might try that have a huge impact on what you're doing. One example, I should have gone through this on the last slide, but that I will pull up real quick is actually an example out of the Office of the President as well. And so we have not done every single test on this page, not at all. We have done some send time A/B testing, and we've also done some long versus short body teaser text. So I'm going to show you that real quick. So varying content areas. Exit out of this real quick and pull it up. You all should have definitely seen this before, but this is Mark's message from February. And when we look at this message and we scroll, 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 and then we get to our secondary stories. And so we hear in the industry, these longer messages are not a best practice. So what we went ahead and did, and we got such good results, we're just moving to this officially in the future, is a shorter version. So just that teaser text there, and then we have this read full message. And so what that's done is before we were taking an open, whether it was an accidental open or somebody who opened it and read every single word twice, we didn't know. So now we can actually see who is reading that full message, who's really engaging. The other incredible benefit that we saw from going with this model, because we brought up these secondary stories much, much higher on that page fold, we saw a 200% increase on clicks on stories below here. So it doubled. We do have this wiki out there where we're documenting all the resources for this. And And so if, like I said, we had talked about A/B testing a few years ago. And so if you had attended this, we've definitely revamped some things on it since then. And so one of those things are those examples, and why I continue to look at this content as dynamic and ever changing is because we would love to get those examples from you all. So I do believe on the send time, and this is where she got very, very granular. I think they tried this model with advancement for broader ages, but they determined it was mostly the over 55, and the assumption is these are families like getting ready with their kids on Sunday night before the crazy week starts. And so they were not doing this for younger populations that they assumed were not getting their emails on the evening of Sunday. So that was a very specific one. I will call out as well, great success from UCCS. Kayla Boyer, the e-com specialist out there, is really amazing at doing all of these tests and just continually seeing what works and what doesn't moving forward. And so 2 different subject line. One, it's time to celebrate you as a birthday message. But a birthday gift from UCCS got a much higher open rate as well as a click rate, which you right now you're like, yeah, I could probably guess that. Of course I want a gift. You all will start seeing, this is another thing that I'm mildly excited about, rolling out. We do have, or we started to populate quizzes at the bottom of some of these wikis. So it's by no means do you have to complete it at all. We're not tracking it in any way, but if you want to test your knowledge, there are just about 7 questions in there that you can quickly go through and test your knowledge. I am going to pivot back to our presentation quickly and just go through, right? We talked theoretically about what is that A/B test, what should you be thinking about, and what are good elements to test, but how do we actually go about these things? And I will go through these slides somewhat quickly, and we actually went through content faster than I anticipated today. So I am happy to stay on the line and go through either more examples or actually hop into Marketing Cloud. But after this, I will just kind of take a gauge on folks and see where you're at. So if we end up wrapping up at 1:30 today, that's perfectly fine. So once you are logged into Marketing Cloud, that A/B testing is found within Email Studio. Right? See that email on the far left side. And so A/B testing is its own completely separate tab. But the good news is once you're in there, it is pretty intuitive as far as how to conduct that A/B test. When you initially create that, you are just going to have to name it. Name your A/B test, which is just great for tracking purposes, and you can give it a description if you'd like. And then you really need to determine what test type you're doing, which probably determined a bit sooner than right at this moment. But pick your subject line, the entire email, content areas, from names, date and times, or pre-headers. And then depending on what you select, it's going to walk you through selecting those 2 components. One very, very important limitation to note with A/B testing, and I don't know why Marketing Cloud works in this way. It seems like a dumb limitation if you ask me, or it's kicked us a couple times. When you're selecting that audience, they have to be in the form of a data extension. If anybody has questions on what that is, feel free to ask. I can dive into it, but you might be more familiar with sending to a report. But this would actually, it needs to be converted to a data extension just for you to be able to perform that A/B test. So something for you to be mindful of when you're requesting your audiences with your e-com specialist. Do you need it as a data extension? Furthermore, you can only send to 1 data extension. So if you're typically sending to 3 or 4, it might not go so smooth for you. It's going to not let you add those multiple lists. But once you've gone ahead and selected those recipients, I have my example in there, then you get a nice little breakdown of who do you want to send to first. So in this, we're sending to 30% of the population first with a 15-15 divide. So we can see that 5,000 right there. And then once a winner is determined, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, the remaining 70% it will be distributed to. So it's nice that you don't have to do an A/B test today and then apply it or reap the benefits of it a week later or a month later. You can have the system do that hard work, just wait an hour, a chunk of time, and then it'll automatically send to whoever the winner is. So the good news is that, again, you get the power of determining who that winner is, and based on what criteria. So do you want it based off of unique open rates or those unique click rates? And how long do you want it to be in people's inboxes and give them time to take action before you trigger it to the remaining population? And then, of course, your final little piece, very similar to sending an email. Do you want it to go out immediately or schedule it in the future? And I mentioned earlier how to really reap those benefits right away would be to set it to send manually. But if for some reason you and your department are a little scared of just triggering that or trusting the system to do it, you can have it set either way. And the other nice little bit is with tracking, also housed in the same A/B testing area, does give you some nice graphics on it. So that example that I used before, the great work Kayla was doing, it's time to celebrate you versus a birthday gift from UCCS. We can see how much better it performed there. Generally, what we encourage you to do is, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and check out your Salesforce business unit level dashboards and get a state of where you've been and where you are today. And then start with those simpler tests. So either a from name, a send time, or a subject line pre-header test is a really good option to start with. Of course, and have to mention it, I think we forget these things all too often, celebrating those successes and really sharing it with your team. Too often we're on to the next thing, and you should celebrate those wins. They matter. But then, of course, keep on testing. This is not something you do once, figure out the right answer, and you're done. Really get into that culture of we need to continually test, continue to be agile, and respond to what our constituents want.